Elara Voss had learned, from a very young age, that the world did not make space for quiet people. She had grown up on the edges of the Ironmoon Pack, not quite invisible, but close enough to it. She ate her meals at the far end of the long wooden tables in the great hall. She completed her duties in the herb stores before anyone else arrived. She walked the forest paths alone, not because she preferred loneliness, but because no one had ever thought to walk beside her. She was an Omega, and in Ironmoon, that meant she was the last person anyone noticed, and the first person everyone forgot. But she had her small, private joys, the smell of pine after rain, the way moonlight gathered in the hollow of an old oak near the border fence, the feeling, on certain quiet nights, that the world was holding its breath for something she could not yet see. She held on to those feelings carefully, the way you hold something fragile in cupped hands. She did not know, on the night of the mate recognition ceremony, that she was about to drop everything she had been holding. The great hall was full. Hundreds of wolves, alphas, betas, omegas, elders, stood in a wide circle beneath the stone arches, dressed in their finest. Candles burned in iron holders along the walls. The air smelled of wood smoke and anticipation. At the center of it all stood Alpha Caden Blackthorn. He was the kind of man a room reorganized itself around. Tall, steady, with dark eyes that carried the particular calmness of someone who had never seriously doubted himself. His father had built the Ironmoon Pack into one of the most respected territories in the Highlands, and Caden had inherited every expectation that came with that. He had been waiting for this night, not nervously. Caden was not a nervous person, but with the quiet readiness of someone certain that what was coming would be right. The moon goddess revealed fated mates through a pull. There was no better word for it. It was a draw, a gravity, a warmth in the chest that moved through a crowd like a compass finding north. Every wolf in the hall felt a version of it. For fated pairs, it was unmistakable. Caden felt it. He followed it. Steady, certain, already forming in his mind some image of who it would lead him to. Someone strong, someone sharp, someone the pack would look at and understand immediately. The pull led him to the back of the hall. It led him to Elara Voss. She was standing near the last row, wearing a plain blue dress that was slightly too large for her. Her dark hair was pinned back simply. She had no remarkable presence, no commanding posture. She looked, if Caden were being honest with himself, though he rarely was, surprised that he had crossed the room to stand in front of her. The hall went absolutely silent. Elara looked up at him. Her eyes were dark and still. For one moment, something in Caden's chest said, yes. He silenced it. He thought of his father's voice. He thought of what the pack expected. He thought of every time he had imagined this night, and how none of those imaginings had looked anything like the quiet, unremarkable girl standing in front of him now. He stepped back. The step was small, but every wolf in that hall understood exactly what it meant. I, Caden Blackthorn, Alpha of the Ironmoon Pack, he said, loudly and clearly, because he had never done anything halfway. Reject you, Elara Voss, as my fated mate. You are not what this pack needs. You are not what I need. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence than before. Elara did not cry. She did not flinch. She did not make a single sound that he could hear. She simply looked at him, and for just 1 second, so brief that Caden would later wonder if he imagined it, her eyes went silver, bright and still and ancient, like something looking out from behind a face it had borrowed. Then it was gone. She nodded once. She turned, and she walked out of the hall, and the crowd parted for her in a way it never had before. The days after the rejection were quiet, in a way that had weight to it. Elara reported to the herb stores each morning before dawn. She sorted dried roots and cataloged supplies, and did not talk about what had happened, because there was nothing useful to say about it. Her friend Zara came every evening and sat with her, and did not push her to speak, because Zara was the rare kind of person who understood that presence was sometimes more useful than words. The bond severance ached. It was a physical thing, a low, persistent soreness beneath her sternum, like something that had begun to grow had been cut off before it had the chance to root. She breathed through it the way you breathe through cold water, steadily, without stopping. At night, she dreamed. The dreams were not the soft, shapeless kind. They were clear and detailed, and always the same place. A ruined stone temple in a clearing, old enough that trees had grown through the gaps in its walls. Moonlight fell across the stone floor in long, steady columns, and in the center of it stood a woman with white hair and eyes that held the same silver light Elara had seen once in her own reflection. "You are almost ready," the woman said each time. Elara always woke before she could ask, "Ready for what?" 1 week after the ceremony, she woke in the middle of the night to a sensation she had no name for. It moved through her like moonlight through water. Warm, bright, deep. She sat up and crossed to the small mirror on the back of her door, and she pulled back the collar of her shirt. On the left side of her collarbone, where there had been nothing before, was a mark. It was silver white and faintly glowing, a crescent and a star, precise and perfect, like something that had always been there beneath the skin, and was only now becoming visible. As she watched, it pulsed once, like a heartbeat. She stood there for a long time. Then she dressed and went to find Zara. Zara opened the door half asleep and became fully awake the moment she saw Elara's face. She sat her down. She looked at the mark. And then she went to the shelf above her bed, where she kept a stack of old texts she had collected over years of reading things no one else found interesting. She found the page she was looking for. She read it twice. She looked up. "Elara," she said carefully, "this is the Lunara mark." The old texts were specific about what it meant. The moon goddess did not choose her chosen one based on strength or rank or visibility. She chose based on something harder to measure, a particular quality of character that only revealed itself under pressure. The chosen was marked before birth. They were never told. They were placed into lives that tested them quietly and thoroughly, over years, until the moment that cracked them open far enough for the mark to come through. The crack was different for every chosen. For Elara, it had been the rejection, not just the pain of it, but the way she had stood in front of a crowd that was waiting for her to fall apart, and had chosen, quietly and completely, not to. That choice had been the key. The mark continued to grow. Over the following days, Elara found that she could hear things at distances that should have been impossible. Minor injuries closed on her skin before she finished looking at them. When she shifted, her wolf emerged differently, larger, silver white, moving through the trees with a lightness that had nothing to do with her feet. She was not safe staying in the pack. She slipped out before dawn on a Tuesday, with a small pack and no note, because there was no one to leave a note for except Zara, and Zara, who had read every old text, already knew. She crossed into the rogue lands. She had been walking for less than 2 hours when she encountered Rin. He was leaning against a tree at the edge of a dry creek bed, and he looked at her with the expression of someone who had been waiting in one place for longer than was comfortable. He was a former Ironmoon wolf. She remembered him vaguely, from years ago, before his exile. He had refused a direct order from an Alpha, and paid for it with his place in the pack. He looked at her mark and stepped back with something very quiet moving across his face. "I have been at this border for 2 months," he said. "I did not know who I was waiting for until right now." He led her through the rogue lands without asking for anything in return. He knew the terrain the way someone knows a place they have spent a long time alone in. He did not talk unnecessarily. He did not treat her gently in a way that would have felt like condescension. He led her to the temple. It was exactly as she had dreamed it. Stone walls with trees grown through them, moonlight on the floor, the smell of something very old and very clean, like air that had never been breathed in. Inside the main chamber, sealed behind a door that responded to the light of her mark, she found 2 things. The first was her mother's journal. Elara Voss had been here. Years before Elara was born, she had stood in this same chamber and read the same old script on the walls and understood something she had then spent the rest of her life trying to protect her daughter from. Not because she doubted Elara, but because she knew what being chosen would cost her, and she had wanted, in the irrational and permanent way of mothers, to spare her from it. She had not been able to. The second was a passage carved into the stone wall in Old Wolf script, which Elara could now, inexplicably, read. It said, "The chosen is not given power. She has always had it. She is only shown the door after she survives the cost of the key." She sat with that for a long time. On the third night in the temple, the moon goddess came to her while she was awake. She did not appear dramatically. She was simply there, standing in the chamber, dressed in something that was either white fabric or light itself, looking at Elara with an expression that was neither warm nor cold, but was deeply, carefully attentive. "You have questions," the goddess said. "Why me?" Elara asked. "Because you are the one who, when the world told you that you were nothing, chose to remain decent," the goddess said. "That is rarer than power. That is harder than strength. I needed someone who knew how to stand after being broken, not someone who had never been broken." She told Elara about the fracture, a weakening in the ancient boundary ward, the spiritual barrier that had stood between the packlands and something old and dangerous for longer than anyone currently living could remember. It had been failing quietly for years. The timeline had accelerated. Someone needed to restore it. That someone was Elara. "I cannot promise you that this will lead to happiness," the goddess said. "I can only promise that it will mean something, and that after this, what you do with your life will be your choice. Not the bonds, not the packs, not anyone else's." She disappeared, and the chamber was quiet, and Elara looked at her mother's journal in her hands, and felt something settle in her chest. Not peace, exactly, but something close enough to work with. Caden had not slept well in 2 weeks. He did not examine this too closely. He was a busy man with a pack to run, and an arrangement with Sonia, the daughter of the neighboring Alpha, to consider. He told himself the persistent ache in his chest was an adjustment period. He told himself the wrongness he felt was something that would fade. Then the scout came back from the border, with a report that made Caden put down every piece of paper on his desk. A wolf in the rogue lands, silver white, enormous, moving like light, made solid. Rogue wolves, stepping out of her path, not out of fear, but out of instinct, the instinct that recognized something beyond ordinary rank. The scout had not gotten close enough to see her face. Caden went to the border himself. He found Rin first, who looked at him without warmth. "She is in the temple," Rin said. "I am telling you this because the goddess said to, not because you have earned the right to know." Caden entered the temple alone. He found Elara in the central chamber. The Lunara mark had spread across her left shoulder and collarbone, and along the edge of her jaw, luminous and precise. She looked up when he entered, and waited without moving. He crossed the chamber. He went to his knees in front of her, not as a performance. His body simply did it before his mind gave the instruction, the way a person lowers their eyes before something genuinely greater than themselves. "I was wrong," he said. "Yes," she said, "you were." He looked at her. He was expecting anger, and he would have accepted it. He was expecting coldness, and he would have accepted that too. What he had not expected was the calm, steady way she looked at him, as if she had already worked through every version of this moment and arrived, on her own, at something he didn't yet understand. "I have a purpose to fulfill," she said. "After that, what happens between us, if anything, is my decision. Not the bonds, not what you want, mine. Do you understand?" "Yes," he said. "Good," she said. And that was all. The 3 anchor points of the boundary ward were spread across the highlands, 2 inside pack territory, and 1 in the rogue lands. Elara traveled to each one with Rin beside her. Zara met them at the second, having tracked them through the forest with the determination of someone who had decided that her presence was not optional. Caden followed. He did not ask permission. He stayed far enough back that he was not in the way. He was there because he could not make himself not be there, and he had at least enough self-awareness left to recognize that this was not about what he needed. The third anchor point was the hardest. The fracture in the ward pushed back. It did not push physically. It pressed inward, against the mind, replaying the most painful memories it could find. Elara stood at the anchor point and felt the rejection again, the silence of the hall, the step backward, the words spoken in a clear public voice, amplified and stretched, playing repeatedly, pressing against the interior of her chest. She stood in it. She let it be what it was, a real thing that had really happened. A door that had cost her something real to walk through. She did not pretend it had not hurt. She did not tell herself it did not matter. She chose, standing there with all of it present, not to let it be the whole story. The ward sealed, the fracture closed. The clearing went quiet, in the particular way that places go quiet when something that was broken has been made whole. Elara returned to Ironmoon. Not as someone returning in triumph, and not as someone returning in defeat. She simply came back, the way a person comes back to a place that is complicated, but is still, in some unresolvable way, home. The pack's response was not simple. There was awe, and there was shame, and there was the difficult silence of people who were not sure what to do with the fact that the girl they had overlooked for years had turned out to be the one the moon goddess had been preparing all along. Elara let them sit with that. Over the weeks that followed, Caden changed, not dramatically, not in ways that announced themselves, but in the specific and meaningful way that real change happens. He began questioning structures in the pack that he had previously accepted without thought. He became someone who listened before he spoke. He stopped making decisions based on what looked strong and started making them based on what was right. Elara watched. One evening, near the end of the season, they walked the border of Ironmoon territory at dusk. The sky was the deep blue that comes just before dark, and the trees were still, and neither of them said much. They were not together. The story was not finished. There was no promise made, and no guarantee given. But Elara walked beside him, and she felt the small, private warmth she had always carried, the one that lived in the smell of pine after rain, and the moonlight in the hollow of an old oak, and she decided that she was willing to see what came next. Not because anyone had asked her to, because she chose to. And that, finally, was enough.